see. Okay. We are live. Yay. Let's make sure the volume's up. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 45 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. This is a show that I created that we've almost had a year of episodes to explore transformation from the inside out, as opposed to what I see a lot in the coaching industry, which is like, oh, if you just do this, then you'll gain mastery over this, or you'll get what you want in life. But so what this show is about is really, how do we have more of who we are? How do we feel better in ourselves and in our lives and have more freedom and peace along the way? So I'm looking forward to interviewing Arden Leigh today. And hi, Arden.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm so happy we're doing this.
Me too.
So I'm going to just introduce Arden for those of to those of you who don't know her. And for those of you who don't know her, I'll just start by saying follow her immediately, because she writes just really, one of the ways that I connected with Arden was just how I initially kind of, when I found you, and then I have been, closely following you, just have appreciated how bold and forthcoming you are about important issues happening in the world and how you feel about them, and really calling people out on, things that, just being willing to really say the thing that maybe is not being said, whether it's about the coaching industry or about how, about the pandemic, about any sort of relevant social issue. And I'm sure that will relate to the topic today as well in some way. So Arden is the creator and facilitator of the Repatterning Project, which is a course in understanding the human operating system and repatterning trauma imprints and social conditioning in order to achieve freedom. And so really, this is actually what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Arden's unique approach to, identifying these patterns, and then being able to, she has a very specific approach to teaching people to, after they've identified them and sort of confronted themselves with maybe some of the harder truths that around like a lot of our belief systems, and different traumas that happened earlier in our life, different conditioning that we've taken on, basically being able to look at that and say, well, this got created unconsciously. Do I still want this? Is this still something that, an operating system that I want to be living my life from? And then doing the work to basically rewire that and repattern it. So she's going to dive way more into the topic. That's my cursory understanding of it. Let me see if there's anything else to. Oh, she's the front woman for the indie pop rock project, Arden and the Wolves. She does many different things. And she is writing a book called The Gifted Kid Program for Enlightenment. I would also add that she, sounds like more recently self-identified as autistic, and then so works a lot with neurodiversity, and also attracts quite a few clients that are neurodiverse, which is obviously a super important topic. And I'm hoping that she'll be able to, that you'll be able to dive into that today, so that there's just more education around something that I think there is, there's a lot of misunderstanding around. So yeah, so welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to dive in.
Great. So let's see. Well, do you want to just add to what I said about what the Repatterning Project is, and we can start there. And, even if you want to give some of the history of how you came to create it and, what
Yeah, you
the
want the
program
origin
is.
story?
Yeah, let's do the origin story.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I reached a point in my life at, I would say, the end of 2015, where it was suddenly glaringly apparent to me that the strategies that I was using in my life to create the things that I said I wanted to create were not actually working in the way that I thought that they would. And I'll be a little more specific about that, right? So in my 20s, I was a pickup artist. I was a dating coach, right? But I was a dating coach. I basically followed the pickup community that was mostly geared toward men. And what I liked about it was I was like, these guys who were engaging in pickup artistry are developing a really proactive, like logistical system for approaching people and creating attraction with them. And like over here, like in women's relationship literature, we had like, at the time it was like, all we had was like, he's just not that into you, why men love bitches, and like all, and the rules, all this stuff that basically said like, just sit still, like just don't do anything, don't approach anyone, just like, just wait for some guy to approach you. And that hadn't worked for me. I was, I was a very late bloomer. I wasn't even sexually active until I was 22 and a half. So I had like all of this scarcity, like throughout my late teens, early, like as other people were going through these rites of passage, I had all this scarcity around relationship. So I was like, well, I'll join the pickup artist community. And I did that. And I wrote this book called The New Rules of Attraction. And I essentially subverted the principles of pickup artistry for women, right? I basically created this method by which we could rebrand ourselves and choose how we interacted with people, and that we could go out and like be confident, be sensual, and start conversations and build attraction. And like, what are the cool little like tips and tricks that all the dudes were doing, and how could I do that as a woman with women's relationship goals in mind?
That's
And I had a lot of them. Sorry, what's that?
I just said that's so cool. I love it.
Oh, thank you. I had a lot of really fun adventures. Like I'm very lucky in that sense that like I can look back at my 20s and I can say like I did the thing. I did the, I went and I seduced my favorite celebrities, and I had a lot of like wild adventures that a lot of other people who maybe did not commit so strongly to that lifestyle, wouldn't I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not committed so strongly to that. And I don't regret any of it, because that's like, well, that's what we're told we're supposed to do when we're in our 20s, right? Especially like I was living in New York City, I was like part of that whole scene. So, but after a while, I realized that I was like, wow, this is in no way actually getting me relationships where I'm valued, relationships where I'm treated well, relationships that are reciprocal. And essentially what I had done in seduction and in submission. I was also in the BDSM scene. I identified as a submissive. Essentially what I had done is I had overlearned the pattern of people pleasing. I had overlearned this system to be like, oh, how can I be more attractive to you? What do I need to do to get you to respond to me in this way, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was putting essentially all of this emotional labor into these relationships where it wasn't reciprocated. So I had this cool thing that I created, but I overlearned it beyond its usefulness. And just as I'll throw this down as sort of, foreshadowing for what I'm about to unpack. But essentially, what I started to, when I came to understand how patterns form, I came to define addiction based on the research that I looked into. I came to define addiction as a pattern we have overlearned beyond its usefulness. Something that we do because we think it's going to get us a certain result, but actually cumulatively, we've taken it past the point of diminishing returns, and it doesn't actually work in the way that we want it to. So there I am being like, love me, choose me. I want to be in a relationship where I'm like valued and seen as sexy and desirable and all this stuff. But I'm like going so hard with this, sort of pickup and seduction stuff that I'm actually expending a lot of emotional labor on emotionally unavailable men whom I have not in any way vetted for whether they're a healthy relationship partner. So I wouldn't have known to explain it that way at the time. But what I did know at the end of 2015, I was like, all right, I had like a situationship, and it was just, I was just like, I felt so disrespected and so disregarded and dismissed. It was just really like, I was getting myself into a lot of emotionally abusive situations. And I was like, all right, clearly I don't know what I'm doing. Clearly, I think that this is supposed to work. I think that because I'm trying to like increase my value to someone, right? I'm trying to like, I'm working on being, how valuable can I be to someone so that they'll treat me well? And I realized after a while, I was like, I'm, let's see. I was like, well, I'm a published author. I literally wrote the book on like how to be attractive to men who are attractive to women. I was like, I'm the lead singer in my band. I'm a lingerie model. Like I'm all these things. Like I can't do this any more than I've already done it. You know, I can't take this idea that I have of like being more attractive and do it any more than I've done it already. I've reached the point of diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. So I basically threw up my hands and I was like, all right, I did that thing that's so powerful that I'm sure you're familiar with. Because, you know, I set an intention and I just said, all right, universe, clearly I know nothing, Jon Snow. So teach me your ways. Like, I'm just going to assume that whatever I'm doing, it's not working. So I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm just going to be open, right? I'm just going to say, you know what, send me the right person, teach me everything I need to know. Mm-hmm. And my whole world blew up. And over the course of between early 2016, I sort of like at the end of 2015, I had set this new intention, like almost sort of as a New Year's resolution. Like, all right, going into a new year, not going to repeat the same patterns that I did before. Don't know what I'm going to do instead. Have no idea how to engage or be in a relationship if I'm not doing the things that I've been doing before. But I'm open to just seeing what happens. And the universe delivered to me every single piece of information that I needed to see, whether it was through experiences with other people, whether it was through signs and synchronicities, whether it was through books that I knew I should read, whether it was through facilitators or courses that I just knew that I was supposed to take, or just, you know, through the practice of magic, you know, through the idea of like intention setting and creating an intentional dialogue with universal intelligence, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And I went on this wild journey, just this jump down a rabbit hole that I could not have anticipated where it was going to take me. But I came out the other side, and during this roughly 2-year period, I was posting pretty transparently. Oh, bless you. I was posting pretty transparently about that process on Facebook. And I sort of had it in mind. I was like, I know I want to be a spiritual teacher of some kind, you know, and I was at the time, I was like, well, I'll read some tarot, you know, or I'll teach some classes on magic that I'm already kind of, you know, familiar with or whatever, that I feel confident that I can teach at this point. But I was still sort of just figuring out like, who am I going to be in this new iteration of myself? And it was around that time, like spring 2018. And I had just released my band's album. It's an EP, a 5-song EP called Who Can You Trust? And I created that album as a means of trauma healing. It's specifically a work of narrative magic designed to heal and release the trauma that I had been through and set myself on a new course. So I released that, and I also I put all my money into it, you know, because I'm really, I say I'm the front woman of my band, and that's true, but it's really a solo project. Like I pay everybody in it, you know, it comes down to me at the very end, and that's nice because I own everything too, you know, but it really is just like a solo operation. So after that, I was just like, well, what am I going to do? And I think it was actually someone who was on my Facebook. I don't even think it was my idea. I think it was someone who was like, you know, again, like we hear whatever we need to hear from the universe, right? Like they always put stuff in front of us that we're supposed to know. And someone who was like, Arden, would you ever consider putting together a course on your own healing journey and what you learned? Because we've been watching you and we see that you did something and it works. Like you are in a much different place than you were just a couple of years ago. And it was like, it was fast. It was a quick turnaround. We saw you go through all of it and not bypass, you know, and you were really doing the work, but wow, like, yeah. Like I think like people could could benefit from this. And I was like, sure, yeah, that's something I could do. And I literally took a piece of 8.5 by 11 printer paper and I divided it up into 8 squares, like 2 rows of 4. And just for the next like month or two, whenever I thought of something that was a key component of a lesson on my journey or whatever, I would just go and write it in one of those squares. And this is where my neurodiversity comes into, because I remember I have an above average recall. I have a really strong memory, which is part of what helps me be good at information synthesis and making connections across like disparate pieces of information. Mm-hmm. So I'd start filling in these squares with some bullet points. And I come up with a name. I'm like, oh, let's call it the Repatterning Project. Like that's cool. It's like we're we all got these patterns, and like there's nothing wrong with having patterns, but we want to make sure that they're the right ones, that they're actually doing the thing that we think they're supposed to do, right? So we're not like being a pickup artist because we want to have a healthy relationship, right? like we're actually picking the things that work, So yeah, I started that out, and I did my first round of the course, where literally I would just, the week before giving the lecture, each of these 8 squares that I put down became a lecture, like, in an 8-week course. And I would go and I would like basically extrapolate the bullet points and fill in any of the information that I needed to remember, looked up the quotations and the statistics or whatever and put everything together. And then I taught it for the first time and I was like, okay, this little baby beta course, let's see how it goes. So I just priced it at like $4.97, which even at the time, even that was a stretch for me. And like to feel confident in my pricing in that way. And I was like, all right, here we go. Hope nobody asked for their money back. And sure enough, no one asked for their money back. And then I was like, all right, I guess this is a thing I'm doing now. And then the amazing thing, and I have one of these open, so I'm going to go ahead and read it for you. But the amazing thing that happened was about 6 months after the course was done, about 6 months afterwards, that's when the testimonials started coming in. Because I'm not gonna lie, like it's a really big download of information. It's like everything that an autistic person with a lot of like an above average memory can recall having happened in the 2 years that she went on this journey, like condensed into 8 weeks of lectures, right? And the lectures are like 3 hours each. Like it's a lot of material, It's part of why I also call the book, which is this, also the same material. It's part of why I call it the Gifted Kid Program for Enlightenment, because it is that like, it's the way I grew up too. Like I was an AP student, I was in the gifted program, it doesn't make me any better than anyone. It just means I'm good at certain things. It means I'm smart in like some very specific ways. It doesn't mean I'm better than anyone else. But yeah, that's what I created. I was like, all right, this is the advanced placement track for people who want to do this work. So it's about like, so the download comes and it's like, everyone leaves the course and they're like, a little shell shocked, they've kind of blown up their lives, and because that's what I did, is I also blew up my life. And then about 6 months afterwards, the testimonials started coming in, and this was the first testimonial that I received. So I'm going to read it to you because I have it here in the manuscript of my book in the introduction. It was from a woman named Jerry Ann, and she wrote this on the business page on Facebook for the Repatterning Project. And what she said was, for pretty much the entirety of my adulthood thus far, I felt like I had a millstone around my neck, like I could hustle all day, every day, and still never manage to escape poverty and depression. I've been working broadly and intensely for the past 5 years to overcome the programming I received from negligent and abusive parents, abusive partners, financial desperation, etc. In the time since the Repatterning Project began, I've overcome for the first time, and I think permanently, the suicidal ideation that had been my constant companion since around age 7, completely reworked my historically tumultuous relationship with my husband, begun to heal a complex set of injuries that have massively impacted my life and work for over 4 years, and taken the first baby steps into building a serious art career. The Repatterning Project has been rocket fuel for my evolution. It has done more to reveal my path to wholeness than years of therapy. It has given me the confidence and enthusiasm to book for 2019 quadruple the number of art shows I have done in any previous year. My art sales for the first 3 months of this year are already about half of my total art sales for all of 2018. It's amazing to be on the cusp of my 30s and feel joyous and alive for the first time I can even remember. So much gratitude to you, Arden, for walking the path that brought you into all of our lives. So I read that testimonial and I was like, well, shit.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh my gosh, now I have this massive responsibility. So I started referring to this course as like the Tesseract, right? I was like, it's this incredible source of energy that I honestly don't quite understand yet, but I know that I have to treat it really, you know, like treat it delicately because it's apparently very powerful. And yeah, and from there, I just started, you know, I offer it twice a year. I offer it once in summer. We just wrapped our summer session a couple weeks ago, and I offer it in winter as well. And yeah, since then it's been growing and you know, like we were talking about, I just finished the book, the manuscript. Like I'm going back and I'm like editing it now, but I just finished it, you know, like Tuesday night or whatever. So it actually feels like I finally, for the first time, actually integrated everything that happened to me, because now I'm seeing it on paper in front of me. So yeah, so it's just a bunch of it's a bunch of information that I learned in a bunch of different places. But when you synthesize it all together and you see how the whole thing works, it's like you can't unsee it anymore. And when you start to notice that you're doing behavior that actually isn't necessarily in alignment with your best interest, that you're doing something that isn't getting you the result that you want, or you're giving a lot of energy to something that's actually making you unhappy. That's huge. Like we give so much. I mean, I did that in my relationships, right? I was in relationships with so many people where I thought, like, if I'm just doing better, if I just do more, if I just try harder, it's going to get better. And I wasn't zooming out and seeing where I'm actually giving so much of my energy and attention to things that are in all honesty, when I'm honest with myself, making me miserable, you know? Yeah. So when we see that, when we are able to like zoom out, I say it's like the difference between like being inside a labyrinth and doing a maze on a piece of paper. You know, you just get that kind of like, well, that's what I'm doing apparently. And so it works. Like you said, it works for people who maybe need a little bit more of cognitive structure to the work that they're doing, you know?
Yeah, can you share? That's a beautiful story. I love hearing kind of the origin of it, and also how there's, you know, even though this is a very structured program, and obviously you've been able to use like your own experience and your ability to like be able to look at, these are my words, but like sort of complex patterns, right? Like how the patterning in the brain happens and how things sort of link to it sounds like create a very structured course. It's also cool that it kind of came out of, I mean, I see this in your writing a lot, like there's like the magic piece, and then there's like this kind of what we might call just more like practical and structured, that you're always kind of interweaving those together, you know, that there's that's what it seems like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's the magic part that's like, you know, there's it's interesting. I often say that my course is like for open-minded skeptics, you know. I'm like, I love working with people who are really too discerning to just take magic at face value, you know, who are like, I want to believe in this witchy stuff. It sounds kind of cool, but I don't know, man, I haven't seen any proof of how it works. And I'm like, great, come work with me. And I will not ask you to believe anything up front. I will explain to you the way that certain things work. And then you're also going to see that amplified. There's going to be certain instances or certain signs, synchronicities, et cetera, that I just can't explain, but you'll start to grok it, you know?
So I'd love for you to kind of, maybe we can take just one example I'd love to sort of understand what some of the components of the repatterning project. Obviously it's probably way more complex than we can kind of get into here, but if you were to take a simple example of, you know, let's say even the person who wrote the testimonial, it's like experiencing depression or suicidality, and then how your method kind of helped her to unwind that. I mean, are you able to respond to that? Is that?
Yeah, well, I think what I heard you initially asking is sort of like, what are the components that comprise the structure of the course, and how does someone learn that? So I can for sure.
Yeah, sure. I think it's nice grounded in some like practical examples, you know, like if person A had done, this is what the pattern that they had done their whole life, or this is sort of right. And they kept kind of going down. I mean, you used yourself as an example earlier, like,
Yeah.
it's like that you were actually in the same pattern potentially of people pleasing or fawning in some way. Right. But it was masked in a certain way. Right. But then I'm guessing that when you were able to kind of like see that more clearly, then you were able to use the components of what you've created in your course to shift that so that, you're not, I mean, it's like, that was such a good example as well, just because I think there are so many things that we do that we think are for our benefit, but we actually haven't seen where they're coming from,
Yeah. Well, I'll start to riff, and then you tell me if this answers your question.
Yeah.
Basically, what we start out with is an understanding that our mind-body systems have an operating system for how we learn things, right? And basically, we're born at some point, and we are this consciousness that comes into this human body and has no recollection of anything before it, and basically is trying to learn how to navigate through the world, right? So the first thing that happens typically is that we're babies, and all we know how to do at that point is cry, right? If we need something, crying is the only tool that we have at our disposal, right? We can kind of like vaguely roll around in our crib. We can make some funny pre-verbal noises. We can, eat, sleep, vomit, poop, and that's about it. So the first time we know that we need something happens and we're scared, we need, our parent, our caregiver, we want to be fed, we want to be held, whatever it is, we cry. And when we cry, we learn, quote unquote, right? We learn that we can expect a certain response, right? So for someone who has parents or caregivers that are pretty attentive, those caregivers are going to be like, oh, baby needs something. All right. And the baby learns like, oh, all right. When I cry, when I ask to have my needs met, I can generally kind of rely on the fact that that's going to go okay for me. Like, all right, someone comes and cool, like this is good. This works. Right. So I'll do it again. If the parents are neglectful, and we know this, dude, like, because I know you're a therapist, like we understand this as being attachment styles, right? But it goes even beyond that too, because it's really about our strategies for learning. So if a baby cries and there's and there's no one around to like take care of its needs, the parents are neglectful or whatever, then that baby learns like, well, I can try to cry for a while. I can just keep crying. But after a while, I'm getting a little tired. No one's coming and taking care of me. So, I might as well just figure out like how to make it just work on my own. So that baby learns that crying is not necessarily an effective strategy, and that it's better to just like rely on oneself. And those babies end up becoming adults who are very like independent and self-sufficient. And then there are also babies who not only do their cries not work when they need help, but they get punished for it, right? I learned, I was an adult at the time. Obviously, I don't remember this, but my mom tells me a story of how she came home one day when I was still a baby, and she found this giant handprint on my backside that my father had left there. And my father was like, I grew up with an abusive dad, so like this tracks, So apparently when I was a baby, I learned, right, not only is it like not effective for me to cry and ask to have my needs met, but it's actually potentially even dangerous, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I learned that again, later on in my life when I tried to draw more boundaries against my abusive parent. I tried to legally emancipate myself from my father's custody, and I failed, right? So again, I tried to draw a boundary. It did not work. I learned, oh, this is bad. This is like, not only did it not work, but now like, I'm being punished for it too. Mm-hmm. So we learned that like for everything we do, we create these internal algorithms, right? If X, then Y, right? If I do this, then I'm going to get this. And I'll give you some examples of this, right? So for me, one of the big ones was if I am valuable to people, then they will treat me well. Obviously, there was a flaw in that algorithm. It didn't check out, right? The math doesn't check out on that one. It doesn't always work. For someone, let's say someone is an alcoholic, right? Because alcoholism is a pattern that has been overlearned beyond its usefulness. That person, they might take a drink for the first time when they're, who knows, like, 17, 18 years old or whatever, or maybe, maybe even older. And what they may learn is they're like, oh, I want to go talk to that attractive person at the party, but I'm nervous, so I'm going to have a shot. Oh, I take a shot. I feel more relaxed. I feel more confident, and I do better at socializing, right? But at some point, that becomes not true anymore. It's like, if I take a drink, then I feel more confident and I'm better at socializing. Well, at some point, no, right? At some point, you're an alcoholic and you're terrible at socializing. You just haven't realized it, because the formation of your pattern in its initial impression is so strong, and you haven't taken that moment to zoom out and actually look at the results that it's getting you. Same thing with, let's say, for example, someone gets plastic surgery and they feel more confident and they feel better. They're like, oh my gosh, I got this plastic surgery and I feel great now. I'm going to go back for more, right? And what happens? Like, at some point, they reach the point of diminishing returns. The point of diminishing returns is what kicks in when the investment that we're putting into something gets us less of a return than the investment that we're putting in, right? So at first, someone might have gotten plastic surgery and been like, oh, I look great, I feel confident. But at some point, those changes are going to be so minuscule that it's not going to be worth the thousands of dollars that they're spending on it. At some point, they might even start to look worse. And if they think that they look worse, what are they going to do? They're going to go and get more plastic surgery, right? So we end up taking on these patterns that we learn that we're not really thinking about. And we end up doing them thinking that they're going to work. And taking them far beyond, beyond their usefulness and beyond, and that for me is, I believe, one of the primary causes of depression. Is we're trying so hard and we think that things should be one way, but they're not working out that way because it's not our fault, because nobody taught us growing up like how our human operating system works. So essentially, that's kind of what we start off in the course.
You're also, can I say something about that? Because to me, you're also speaking about everything you just spoke about, in my opinion, is exactly what we do as children, right? In order to learn to cope. So exactly. It's the same sort of idea that it's like, okay, well, in that environment, this helped me to survive. But now as an adult, this actually isn't helpful anymore at all, right? And so now I need to actually see. And I love the definition of that it's a pattern that it's beyond its usefulness. Like even that it, any kind of addiction is that, which it makes a lot of sense. That it's not so much that it's like honoring the pattern for what it was, and that there was a point at which this was actually adaptive for you, but then being able to look back and be like, okay, now it's no longer adaptive. Do I want to actually keep repeating this pattern, or do I want to create a new one? So it sounds like that's like kind of at the heart of your work.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And of course, as the saying goes, the difference between medicine and poison is dose, right?
Yeah. I mean, I also just really like it. And I think about this with my clients as well, that it's a very compassionate approach as well. It's like, there's always we're always looking at, I mean, there's a utilitarian part of it, which is what you're speaking to. And I often think in those terms too. I'm like, well, what's useful? Like, what's actually going to work? Like, let's look at that. But also, I think it's also a compassionate view. It's like, well, we were doing something in an attempt as an organism, right, as a human, to get our needs met, to feel better, to, I guess I would say, for something. I guess I would say those two things: to feel better and to get our needs met are sort of like at the heart of it. But now this isn't actually working. And so it's, I keep thinking as you're talking, because I think my biggest addiction for many years was healing. So it was like endlessly healing, doing this thing and that thing. And why can't I ever seem to get there? Which is what I do. That this is like the population I love working with, is people who've done a lot of work on themselves, so that we can look at that kind of addictive pattern, right? And at a certain point, it became something that, for me, that was an addiction, right? That actually had gone past its initial usefulness and was just almost just regurgitating, repeating itself.
That's quite common. That's like, healing feels good. So if I want to heal, I have to have something to heal from. So if I'm done with healing, who am I anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
People do that with rescue as well. I've known people who have, I watch them do it. Like they are unconsciously creating chaos in their lives because the only way that they know how to receive love and affection is by someone. Yeah. And it's like Cartman drama triangle stuff, you know, which I'm sure, I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
learned helplessness also. I was going to jump in when you were talking about like it being a self-compassionate approach, which I love that reflection, by the way. Cause again, like I look at all this and I'm like, y'all, I was the smart kid growing up and I still did all this, right? Like even like this didn't even escape by me. And one of the things that really changed my view around this and allowed me to have compassion for myself was when I learned helplessness. There's this experiment that was done on a bunch of dogs, and it's kind of mean to the dogs. But I read about this in Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, which I'm sure you're also familiar with. And what happened was they put a bunch of dogs in cages and they gave them a bunch of shocks and the dogs couldn't leave the cages. And then they opened the cage doors and they also had a control group of dogs. They were like, all right, here's some dogs that we've never shocked before. We're going to also put them in cages, but we're also going to leave the doors open. So the doors are now open on all the cages. And the dogs who have never been shocked before, they get shocked in the cage and they're like, what the hell, man? And they run out of the cage. Like, what are you doing? Right? The dogs who have been accustomed to the shocks in the cages when the doors were closed received the shocks even when the doors were open and didn't leave. And when I read that, I was like, huh. I was like, wow. There were so many things that I had done in my life that if I really admitted what was going on, I was like, why didn't I just leave? Why didn't I just leave this abusive relationship? Why didn't I just leave this abusive work environment? I've stayed. It must not have been that bad, right? And when I learned helplessness, I was like, Arden, if you wouldn't blame those dogs for not leaving the cages, why are you blaming yourself? I was like, oh, this is just my biological function. This is what my human operating system does. It learns helplessness, and then I end up not leaving because I'm just so used to what's happening. So that's just an invitation for me to bring more mindfulness and always come back to the present and be like, do I really want to be here? And what I emphasize to people as well is I'm like, all right, what does that remind you of? That time that those dogs spent in those cages with the doors shut that they could not leave, no matter what traumas were applied to them. What does that remind you of? And the answer is the first 18 years of our lives in which we are literally the legal property of our major caregivers. I tried to leave. It did not work for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was also going to say, right? Is that even with your story, because you shared it earlier, that it's like you actually had, I have a similar story, actually. I was a pretty fierce kid that was trying a lot to get my needs met and kept getting, sort of shut down and then shamed and, all kinds of things. And so it makes sense. I mean, we're talking about learned helplessness, but that's also a pattern. To me, it's beyond learned helplessness. It's the pattern of like, here's what's actually gotten carved in the nervous system and the body and in my belief systems, right? Like I go towards help or I go towards what's good for me, because in both of our cases, that's actually what we were doing. And now I'm getting shot down. So the world is like, what I'm learning is, and I believe it's like, it's also in our bodies. What I'm learning is like, okay, I'm helpless. I can't actually affect change in this way. But it sounds like you see that in like a lot of the people that you work with. Like there's a sort of like almost everybody has that as some kind of patterning, like something that they sort of tried to bid for that they couldn't get met.
Yeah, I think it's just an idea, it just comes back to that idea. And you referenced this earlier too, where, we have this environment, this specific environment of our childhood homes where we're trying to navigate things, and we're not allowed to make choices for ourselves, right? And unless our parents allow us, but like legally, we're not like legally we
Oh,
you
I
know.
see. Okay. So regardless of the environment, you're kind of saying there's a, like, everybody learns this because, I mean, I would just say that there are some families and parents who are much better at allowing their children from a young age to make choices, which I think engenders a sense of power, like agency,
Yeah.
right? Like, even if you know, even and do it in a way that, like, is actually obviously in a more securely attached environment, do it in a way where, you know, it's actually more centered around the child. Like, okay, even if they're putting up boundaries and whatnot, it's like, okay, well, you have this choice or this choice, you know, or what do you think the best choice is for yourself? You know, I mean, there's so many ways that a parent could, even within being, you know, the legal property, like the child being the legal property. I do think that personally, I think that there are so many ways that in a healthy environment, a parent, I mean, that's what healthy attachment is. That's what I think, you know, they're helping a child to feel resilient, to feel confident, to take small steps and be like, oh, wow, I just took this step and it led to this, or I just fell down, but actually I can get right back up and try the next thing, right? Which is to me the opposite of powerlessness. That's a sense of agency. Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And to be clear, like I'm not a parent and I'm not saying that like every parent
Oh, yeah,
damages their child in that way. But what I am saying is that there's this kind of messed up paradigm in our society where it's like up until age 18, like the structure goes that, and this also goes for our educational systems too, right? Like to an extent, we might be able to say, well, I'd rather go to this school than that school, but that's also like a point of privilege, right? So we're also kind of stuck in our educational system unless we decide to like be a renegade and drop out, or what if our parents are supportive of us, or if they send us to some like Montessori school. I went to private school, so I was privileged in that regard too, but even so, we're in these environments where we essentially we can't leave. And then and so we have these sort of limited structures for the way that we, you know, learn patterns, set up coping mechanisms for ourselves or whatever. And then the minute we turn 18, it's like, all right, now you're responsible for everything. and we're in a whole different environment. And so we go, what do we do? We go off to university maybe, or we start our first jobs or whatever it is. And we are still our machine learning, our mind body systems has still learned the same patterns that we learned in this very one specific environment. So it's very possible for us to learn healthy patterns and healthy attachment in our childhood if that's being facilitated for us. I'm not saying that everyone necessarily has a bad childhood, but what I'm saying is that everyone has a specific childhood, right? So whatever.
No, it's a good point. Yeah. So you're kind of saying, I mean, it sounds like regardless of your childhood, then part of the repatterning project and part of this work is, and this is how I also see my work about, is what I'm about to say, is how do we begin to identify these patterns and shift them in a way where we're finally getting to choose how we want to live our lives. I mean, that's actually what I would say is at the heart of it, right? Like, even if you had a secure attachment or a secure environment as a child, and you did develop a lot of great coping mechanisms, it's like we all have that point. You could say every human, part of the human journey, specifically in the way that our culture is set up, right, is like, okay, these are the ways that I've learned from the environment around me, from, you know, the coping mechanisms that I took on. Do I still want this? Is this how I want to live? Exactly. Is this in service to me? And so it's a good point, because even in a healthy environment, a child might be like, I mean, someone is older and then they're like, wow, this is how my family does it. But actually, that's not really inherent to me. Like, that's not actually what I would choose. So now I need to identify, okay, I can identify that pattern. And now what do I want to choose? So then what I want to ask you, because we've been on for a while and I just want to make sure you get to it.
Of course.
Obviously, there's a huge component of your program that's like identifying the patterns, like, and you know, you said to me before we had this interview that I think you used the word confronting them, and kind of how challenging that can be to really be.
I will say it is confronting. I don't do the confronting.
Yeah.
Information. The information
but that it can be confronting, right? Because also, I mean, you didn't say this, but this is what I would say. Looking at our patterns, as much work as we've all done on ourselves, like I'm always finding new patterns. I'm always like, whoa, wow, I do it that's what I'm doing, or, you know, so I get what you mean by confronting, but also that what was I about to say? No, I don't remember. It's funny. I had like a brain. Well, yeah. So what we were saying is that yeah. So first you're identifying the pattern, and that can be confronting.
Yeah.
Because, oh, this is what I was going to say. It's that, I mean, what's really interesting, right, is that part of the reason that it's probably really confronting is because we've all developed a sense of identity. So even if something's not working, we're comfortable. Part of us can be very comfortable in that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and those are some of the things that I notice in my own life or my clients' lives. Like those are the things that are the most challenging. It's just, it's something that's so close to our identity, you know, like, yeah, like for me, I'm in the process of, for example, like I can be like the healer, and I'm actually looking at how that has actually had negative impacts in my life in terms of some of my relationships, right? Like, oh, I'm the one who can sit with people and be with them when they're experiencing all of this, right? And there's like certain aspects of that that actually aren't serving me, that I don't want that to be all of who I am. I don't know if that's a good example, but that's.
Yeah, no, just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're under any obligation to perform that emotional labor for someone, right? Is that what you're getting
Exactly.
at?
Yeah, exactly. And deciding what situations, like for me, it's like, okay, I want to do that, you know, I want to do that in my work, but I don't want to do that in a romantic relationship, for
Right.
example. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
or you want to be met by an equal, right?
yeah,
You want to be
exactly.
met by someone who, at the very least, if that space that you're going to hold for them, that you want to be met by someone who also has that same level of mastery, or at the very least, a level of mastery, perhaps in another area that complements you, so that
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
that loop, it's that
Yeah.
infinity loop of energy, right? This
Well,
is
and I see that as part of, and then I want to get into like how you actually help people
for
with
sure.
after you identify the pattern. But, you know, I see that in my own life as both what I choose on the outside, but it's actually the pattern shift is about how am I relating to the world? So I can give you an example. Like, this is just like I've been noticing recently, like a friend will start talking about something going on in their life. And I find myself, without even thinking about it, just being like responding to them in that kind of healer role when I actually don't really want to be talking about it. Like, I'm like, I just want to chill out. Like, I actually don't, right now, I mean, to be blunt, like, I don't really care about what's going on in your relationship. I mean, and it's not to say that I don't care about them, but it's like, it's an example of like, when I'm really in touch with myself, I don't actually want to go into this, but there's a habitual, my being knows how to do that so well. So somebody starts talking about what's going on in their life, and I just immediately take on that role. Right.
Yeah, yep.
I think
So you
an
have the
example.
answers and they're right there, and you're like, no. I know that too. You know, I also know that feeling. And yeah, for me, it's definitely been about choosing friendships where I feel that it's reciprocated in some way. You know, I have one of my best friends is this just amazing woman who is really good with tech. And she's done so much stuff for me, like helping with my computers and like the things that I'm like, she literally like works in IT, so like she'll come over and actually we're pretty equal at like holding space for each other, talking about our relationships and stuff. But she'll come over and I'll be like, yeah, look at my computer, but I'll make you dinner, so there's always
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and
friends who have it as a value, that reciprocity in some way, that like mutual satisfaction in the relationship is a value that they hold in their friendships. Like that's something to be discerned.
well, and so what I'm curious about, and let's make sure, let's like dive into how you actually help people, but that's an example of an external behavior. And what I have seen in myself and in others is that it's kind of feels like it has to be both. Like the example I gave, I was purposely using it because it's an example of, even if that friend actually would reciprocate, do I actually have choice in my own being to not be in this role? So, because I see it as that, right? Like, because if I am not playing that role, then I could actually approach the conversation and respond in a different way that then would, like, I'm creating a new reality with that person, right? Instead of
Right.
like, it's not even like about the person. I mean, I think it's both and. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, I think we do need to shift the external. But one of the things that I've seen in my own life and with my clients is that sometimes people will, I'm really good at guiding people to switch the external. But then sometimes if we haven't done the like deeper rewiring work, it doesn't actually make a difference in their life. It's like they say no to the man, the unavailable man, but then there's no new man that comes in, or they keep attracting the same man, right? Even if they can say no to him and they don't choose it. So it's just it seems like it's an interfacing of both, our own capacity to shift the pattern kind of in the inside, and then make different choices for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say about that. I will say that I don't want to in any way dismiss the necessity of the internal work. And so like the modality I work in for that, for example, is timeline therapy. But I also talk with people and I'm like, listen, if you need to go see a somatic therapist, if you need to see an energy worker because there's emotional energy that you need to release, then do that. You can do it with me with timeline therapy, or you can do it, in another sense. But I also really want to, I really want to emphasize that the will to change our ways of being is so much about building up that muscle memory, and we're gonna know that we're gonna slip back, first of all, right? I had I had a story for me of like when I slipped back into my old pickup artist patterns. I was like, oh, I'm doing the thing. Oh, but I've been celibate for almost a year now, and like, what does it matter? I'm just like, oh, he's kind of cute and whatever, and naturally, like, the universe was very quickly like, no, Arden, this is not good for you, right? I won't get into that whole story because I know we don't have a ton of time left, but what I do talk about in terms of changing that external reaction is decreasing our turnaround time. It's like, did I notice that I did the old thing? And each time, can I get a little bit quicker at noticing it? Even if like I do it and it's like 3 days later and I notice like, oh my God, I totally held the kind of space for that friend that it actually really drained me. And that was 3 days ago, but I notice it now, it's been 3 days, right? So maybe the next time it happens, can I notice it the day after? And then the next time it happens, can I notice it like the same day? And can I start to notice it sooner and sooner and show compassion for myself? Because I really am building up a whole new muscle, but I'm going to practice and I'm going to be like, all right, what is the way that I do want to respond? And I'm going to just carve that same, again, this neurons that fire together, wire together. So it's like, can I carve that new neural pathway out of that place of mindfulness? If I want to be responding in a different way, can I train myself to respond in that way? And it takes time, it takes sometimes multiple attempts, and that's fine. Like, that's why we have a community of people to be supportive around that and to all cheer each other on. But also I want to comment on what you were saying about like, oh, they discern away from the unavailable man, but then there's no one, right? That is this beautiful place that I love called the void, right? We're like, I don't want that anymore. I don't want that anymore. I don't want that. And where most people mess up is they're so uncomfortable in the void that they go back to their old patterns. So one of the things I teach is like, get comfortable in the void, because the void, I want you to rewire your idea of what the void is, of like, oh, I'm alone and it's empty and there's nothing going on. No. This is the womb of infinite creation. This is the space where if you get quiet enough and you let the dust settle, you can create anything you want. But you're going to have to wait for that lag time, because there's always lag time in our manifestations, right? We create the internal state and it takes a moment before that shows up in our external reality, but it'll happen. So it's our job at that point, should we choose to accept the challenge, right? It's our job at that point to continue discerning away from the old thing that we don't want anymore, and to start putting what we do want into what I call like the nuclear reactor of our confirmation bias, right? Where do I look for more and more evidence of the thing that I do want? And maybe I don't have a man showing up for me yet, but maybe I have a guy friend. I decided to repattern my relationships with men like right as Trump was getting elected into the presidency. I had so much examples of toxic masculinity, like throughout the Me Too movement, the Brett Kavanaugh appointment, like so much examples of men behaving badly in the world. And I fought so hard to be like, all right, but it only takes one. And like, where can I find examples of healthy masculinity, even if they're few and far between? I'm going to hold out for that. So I concentrated on like my male friendships for a while. I built some really amazing friendships with men who were emotionally supportive and who were not like the guy, but they were more evidence of what I wanted to see in the world. And if I could start relating to men better, then I was going to have better and better men coming into my life.
That's a great example. It's interesting. There's this term, it's one of my favorite terms from Gestalt therapy it's called the fertile void. And it's literally in Gestalt, it's when, which is a form of therapy, it's when you've worked with the polarity so much that there's actually like a new thing is being birthed, but it hasn't yet been birthed. So it sounds like it's to some extent a similar thing. Like, you know, you've worked with you're turning away from the pattern. And then a lot of what you're also helping people with, it sounds like, is what is the pattern now that you do want to create, right? And then you're looking for it in the world. Like, so it's taking little small baby steps. I like the example you gave, because it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to meet a partner right now, but what about the men that are already showing up in my life? Can I notice when like that man just opened the door for me and how that felt, and, or whatever it is. One thing I just want to name that is interesting, that you said before, and I think this is getting at your approach a little bit. It sounds like your approach is quite cognitive, and that in your kind of experience, it's just different, because I do a lot of rewiring through the nervous system in the body, where I go directly into the body where it's stored. And then when we unwind that, there tends to be a lot, like, people can make a different choice for themselves. So it's kind of like, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think that they actually work quite well together. Because I think but it is interesting to me. I'm just kind of like reflecting on what you're sharing, right? That, because in the work that you're doing, it's like, you're saying, okay, we become aware of the pattern, we look at it, we make a different choice, we rewire it into something new, and we start to do the new behavior. It's a lot of behavioral change. Like, we actually create a new behavior, and that starts to create a different neural pathway. Like, we create a different groove in the neural pathways. So then we're in a new groove, and then that starts to show up more in our lives. I'm just kind of like considering, you know, the different, because I sort of see them as being like, I could see them as kind of going together and really supporting one individual. And I'm curious what you found, because I know for me, like purely cognitive approaches haven't been as effective, but then there's times where it's like, I've gone so deep into the body and the nervous system that it's like, okay, just make a different choice. Just do it. You know what I mean? Like that's the power of the will. It's just like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. You know, I'm actually just going to make a different choice. Let's see what happens. So I'm just kind of toying with, you know, the fact that they're different approaches, but they lead to the same thing, and they probably could work well together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, for that internal wiring work, the modality that I use is timeline therapy. Which you may be familiar with. It's a branch of NLP created by Tad James. And essentially what we do is we go, we find the moment where that belief or memory.
I want to make sure we end in 3 minutes. So why don't you share this? And then we could go on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. Essentially, we go back to the moment that on the timeline that belief was formed. And we install a new memory in its place. And I allowed them to create that memory, because I'm a big believer in free will. You know, I'm a big believer in like, no, you are doing this. I'm helping you. I'm showing you what to do, but you're doing this. You're creating the memory that you want there. So I help facilitate them through that, and I work them through the visualization. And that will sometimes shift things internally that maybe we couldn't reach just cognitively. So it's kind of almost it's still a very cognitive way of approaching it as far as that internal wiring.
Right, but no, it's super. Yeah, it'd be really interesting at another point maybe to kind of go into the differences and, I mean, get into it more, because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And there's a lot more that we do too. I mean, like, there's the 4 ways that beliefs are formed. So we talk about backwards engineering the beliefs that we do want. There's hacking our confirmation bias, which is essentially like applied law of attraction, but with no shitty like spiritual bypassing. So there's a lot of that too.
Cool. Well, awesome. Maybe we'll have to have a part 2 on this show.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I would love for people, as we're ending, to hear how they can work with you.
Yeah, my website is the repatterningproject.com. I'm actually currently enrolling for my fall course of the Myths and Magic course, which is a bit of a more right brain approach. It's about how we use narrative and archetype to change our beliefs instead of just identifying the algorithms, right? It's a little more creative and fun. So I'm enrolling for that now. And of course, you can find me facebook.com/Arden.Leigh. So you'll find that's my personal page, but also facebook.com/the Repatterning Project. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at it's me, Arden Leigh.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation, and I look forward to potentially continuing it.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy that people get to learn about your approach and really grateful for the work you're doing. If you don't know me, I'm Lori Beth, and I do this show weekly. And I also am a psychotherapist and a psychospiritual mentor. And I offer a mentorship program for women that's helping women to resolve lifelong traumas, often relational trauma, but a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today, it's my own approach, so that they can stop being a self-improvement project and actually create, the life that they want. And so that's why it was really fun to have you, because we go about it differently, but we are definitely doing similar work in the repatterning. So thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. Yeah. Let me